In this video, we're going to take a look at the Reflectance Channel. This is a complete overhaul of how reflections are calculated within Cinema 4D, and it's one of the biggest under-the-hood changes that has been made for Release 16. So I'm going to be taking a look at this model, and I'm just going to render the base mesh as it is here. So just the simple no material render here. So I'm going to create a new material, and I'm going to go ahead and pick a little bit of a color. Now, one thing that needs to be noted here is that I have a sky object placed in the background, and with an HDRI material placed on there, and a compositing tag telling Cinema 4D to use the sky material to cast shadows to light, but I do not want it to be seen by camera. You'll see that it is seen by reflection, refraction, transparency, etc. So in this new material, I'm just picking a color, and so in the past we would have had a specular channel and a reflection channel, and we'll look at how that works in just a second. But now we have the reflectance channel, and this blends those two together and allows you to have more realistic, more physically accurate reflections rendered within Cinema 4D than what has ever been possible before. So I'm going to go ahead and drop this on to my object and do a quick render. So right now what you're seeing is we only have a specular highlight. And if I click on the default specular layer, you'll get some different information here. So notice that we have different types of specular. And so as you go through these, the default is the legacy. That's the traditional kind of specular highlight that you would be used to from previous versions of Cinema 4D. I can choose some of these newer models, such as CGX, and you can just see how that fall off is calculated differently. Beckman. So you have different types of speculars and reflections that can be used, different models that can be selected from here, including anisotropic. So getting some of those non-uniform speculars and reflections. For now, I'm just going to go back to, let's say, Beckman for the moment. And so what you'll see is that you're going to be going through and looking at multiple tabs and settings. So the first of these is the Layers tab, and this just deals with kind of a layering effect of different speculars and highlights and how they can interact with one another, similar to what we've seen in the layers shader within Cinema 4D or any kind of editing software such as Photoshop, Nuke, or After Effects, where you're able to adjust not only the layering, how things are placed in order, in stacking order, but also how they blend with one another, or do they blend with one another. So right now you'll see that the default specular is set to add, so it's building on a base, but since we only have one layer here, it's not doing much. So if I add a layer here, and let's say I say CGX, it's going to bring this in as with a reflection. So if I look in here and see the type, again I've chosen CGX for this type. Then we have attenuation. And attenuation is kind of similar to what we see up here. It's how the material, how this reflection is calculated with regards to the color channel. So with attenuation set to average, if I were to render this right now, even though I was getting that kind of blue preview from the color channel within the viewport, you'll notice that this has completely overtaken the color channel. All right, so let's go over to an older version of Cinema 4D, and I think it will help explain how this is working and how we can better edit these attributes to get what we're looking for. So if we go over to an older version of Cinema 4D, you'll see that I have a similar blue material with a specular highlight placed on it. And if I render this right now, I'll get this look. So the moment that I turn on reflection, you'll see that it completely overrides my color channel, just as we saw when we added a reflection within the Reflectance channel of R16. So if I turn on additive here in the older versions of Cinema 4D, it's changing kind of that attenuation value, the type that we saw in R16, which by default is set to average. So this is kind of the average setting in older versions. So if I turn on additive here, you'll see that it begins to only build the reflection up on top of the color. So it's working together similar to a blend mode, and I get something radically different as I actually will pick up the color from the color channel, that base diffuse color, and then add the reflection on top of that. So the controls within R16 are much different with the Reflectance channel, but you can still get similar results, but even more realistic in their handling of reflection. So if I come in here, and so I have layer 1 here as my reflection, just going to rename this. So as with just about anything in Cinema 4D, you can just double click on it or click on the name there. If I double click, I can change the name. So here's my default specular layer, here's my reflection layer, and then I have the layers controls overall, how these things are working together. So we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about how we can set this up. So if I go to my reflection, right now again with attenuation set to average, we're basically overriding everything with this reflection layer. If I change this to additive, I'm going to begin to build up on top of the base. So you'll automatically see here that the preview changes, and again I'm picking up the color channel now as this is adding to that color channel. Some other things that can be done here are the blend modes. So as we said, the default specular was set to add, which is not a problem in this case. But if I set the reflection to add here, that again will alter how this is calculated on top of the specular. And then of course you have your opacity slider here, and this could also be looked at as the layer mask. So as I drop that down, I'm going to start removing the reflection strength. And as I said, this can be done both inside the Layers tab. It can also be done within the reflection layer itself. So layer mask controls the strength. So as I pull this out, you can see in my previews how I'm pulling out some of that reflection. So that's the beginning of kind of building up your materials using the Reflectance Channel. And in some other videos, we're going to start going through some of the different options. So from this, I hope you have taken that the attenuation is extremely important in how the reflections and speculars are calculated. One more thing before we move on is the maximum mode. Now, the metal mode for attenuation is kind of reserved for bringing in legacy files, so older Cinema 4D files that have particular setups that are metallic in nature, how it created those materials. So if you're wanting those to remain consistent to what you had in those older files, metal is provided as an option. But one that I should look at before we move on is the maximum mode, and it comes in if you're wanting to have a colored reflection. So if I drop down my colors, maybe let's make this green reflection. If I choose maximum mode, you'll notice this update. So maximum mode will work with the colors to provide a colored reflection versus the other mode. So if I have this at additive mode, you can see I'm getting a little bit of that, but not near the intensity of maximum mode. So I hope from this video that you understand attenuation is that the mode of which these layers are going to be calculated with regards to particularly the color channel, how they're going to interact with the color channel and with one another. You're dealing a lot with the layers tab. And again, we'll look at this more in depth later on. The last bit here, the layers tab, is your global reflection brightness and global specular brightness. And those work to kind of control universal settings within the material. So you could have 5 reflection layers and 4 specular layers, and this will adjust the strength of all those, the cumulative effect. So if I lower the brightness of the reflection, it doesn't matter how many reflection layers I have, they're all going to be lowered to 24% of whatever their value is. So hopefully that's given you a good start of understanding the Reflectance Channel versus previous versions of Cinema 4D, where we dealt with reflection and specular separately. And in the next videos, we'll start to break down some of these settings and actually build up a material from scratch.